All right. My tonight's idea for this episode of Guitar by Night, sweeping arpeggios, what they are good for, and how to get there, how to make them easy for us, and what I learned from practicing and playing them. So first of all, I find them to be a relatively weak tool in your guitar techniques tool bag. So I think of them as a very indirect way of learning something very important, because as a technique, well, they're just what they are. They are a chord run spelled over the fretboard, and that keeps the notes separate, and they get boring very easily. And what I mean by sweeping arpeggio in general is a situation where I have notes that I'm about to play prepared through my fretting hand, and use very economical picking to trigger them. And the main objective is to keep overlap of the notes to the minimum. So in principle, it may seem just like a strummed chord, right? I mean, this is a strummed chord, it's a single movement. My notes are here on the fretboard already. But the goal is to limit the ringing to minimum. So I want them to sound like separate notes. So it's almost like a violin run through across the strings, because on violin the strings are arced, so it's really hard to play more than two strings at the same time. So as you go across the strings and you change the angle of the bow, you usually just play single string. That's why it sounds detached and very, very natural as a single line, not a chord as such, right? So this is where the difficulty comes in. And I have a couple of ideas how to get there and what the objective is, because apart from having this ability of playing consecutive notes across the strings in a single strum, which doesn't necessarily have to be like a very useful technique. I mean, we'll get there how it could be, but in principle it's more about adding another picking technique that we can later use for everything else. And here's where the trick comes, because sweeping arpeggios are very, very different to everything else that we usually do with picking hand. So let me show you a little example. Whenever I play a line that is in closed position and I use alternate picking, my focus and position and the way that my hand works against the string is focused in one particular spot, and I want to cycle around the string back and forth, and then switch to another string if I need to. And the movement of the pick can come from a variety of different places. It could be either my rotational movement of my palm. It could be just joints of my fingers. with my palm stationary, though it looks like it's moving, but actually these are just my sausage fingers. So those all in fingers right now. I can use movement of my elbow. So everything else is stationary. Or I can use even use my arm and my forearm, right? So, or I can use combination of those, and that's actually what I'm doing. This is the most natural way for me to compound those little movements to optimize whatever I need at certain point that I want to, or whatever sound I'm aiming for. So, for example, this finger action is something that I use all the time because I hold my pick in a very gentle manner. So basically, it springs back. Just I don't want to get out of the frame, but basically, I barely hold it, and it just works its way in my fingers. I mean, that's what it does when I play. I don't hold it, I don't let string work against the pick. I let the pick just snap back and forth in my fingers. This is a 2mm pick. It doesn't bend at all. So basically that's the action I'm aiming for. I mean, I don't know whether you can see this on the screen, but it's barely anything. It's like holding holding a, I don't know, a little animal that you don't want to hurt. You don't want it to get away from you, but you don't want to hurt it. That's kind of the idea. I heard this, I think it was Jim Chapin, or one of the great drum educators, that was showing Muller technique, and that was his idea of holding drumsticks. That you hold it like a very little fragile bird, that you don't want to hurt it, and you don't want to let it go. So it's just barely anything, weight of your fingers, and it's kind of the same thing with a pick. That's the idea that where I get from the drummers world, because drummers are great. They're great people to learn from in terms of movements and grips and physicality of instruments. This is something quite incredible to look for, because they also have a variety of techniques, and sometimes they're pushing the boundaries of what is humanly possible in terms of application of certain techniques. Things are happening in a very quick manner, so it's very interesting to see where do they get their points of reference and timing and all these tiny little things, how muscle works, which part of it is conscious, which one is just practiced, and it's just kind of there in muscle memory. That's what I always find really fascinating in instrument technique. But well, in general, that's what it is. So that's also this kind of grip of a pick guarantees that I'm not that reliant on the type of pick that I'm using. I play with different types, 2mm, 351 shape. I also use one, and it's 1.5 mil, and 2 Dunlop jazz picks, the little ones. That's just 3, and just 3XL. So one is very tiny. It's like a Joe Pass pick. And it's just when I'm aiming for a certain sounds. That's I mean, it has nothing to do with ergonomy. It's all about sound, all about certain feel that I'm going for. And it doesn't really, in terms of my comfort as a player, it doesn't matter what pick I use when I use this kind of grip, because if I want to get my attack slightly harder, I just hold it slightly tighter, and it wobbles less, so I get slightly different sound, slightly different attack. Anyway, what's the deal what's the deal with sweeping arpeggios, how to get into them. So I think we could discuss first very basic shape, because we will play inversions of triads. The idea is we want to learn major triad shape, and we'll spread it over the strings, and we'll learn the movement of a picking hand and why it's so different, what's so special about economic picking, and why it takes some time to get used to it. And once it's there, once the smooth movement across the strings is there, and the action of all the muscles and all the joints, it feels natural, and we can put it consistent rhythm in there, we can use this technique for everything else. But through sweeping arpeggios, we can kind of implant them in there and make them stay. Okay. Anyway, why arpeggios? Why triads? They're a great ear tuning thing. They give a very, very clear and strong point of reference where we are in terms of harmony. So knowing chord tones is really great. Triads are like they're like a step up from basic intervals in terms of building blocks and elements of music that we basically use all the time for everything. So triads are very useful. They're great to know. It's nice to have all those shapes and sounds in head and associate certain sounds with certain shapes and certain movements. Okay, so let's start with something very basic and some basic concepts. So I'm going to use this shape of C major in here as a starting point. So it's like an F shape, but it's on 8th fret. And now I'm going to reduce it just to top 3 notes. So I'll hold the bar on 8th fret, and on 9th fret I use my middle finger. So right now I have this triad, E, G, and C. Now I wanted to make it simple because this little triad already contains a couple of challenging elements when we want to detach notes from each other. Because the idea is that we're using single movement of a pick, and it's going to be upstroke, and at the same time, right after the note has rang, we'll lift the fingers from fingerboard. So let's try to do a very, very simple thing, very slowly. I'm going to play my note and let the pick drop onto next string. So I start with 3rd string and let the pick rest on the second string. Okay, how is it different from anything else? Possibly if I intended to play a single note, I would do like a little circular and escape movement. I would strike a string and move my pick away from strings. But here I want my pick to stop on a single 2nd string. Okay, now after we after we already get this movement with that allows us to rest on the next string, let's try to put a rhythm and certain equal divisions between those 2 strings that we're going to play. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The idea is that I'm not worried right now about what my fretting hand is doing. I just want to trigger those 2 strings with downward movement in one direction. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm resting on 1st string. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's add the first string. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, and on 4 we'll just keep those notes ringing. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's speed it up slightly. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now because fretting hand has been dormant, it was just sitting there holding the arpeggio shape. So this time we're gonna take a step back and we'll try to separate first note, E note, from the rest of them. Okay, the way I think about that is after playing my first E on 9th fret, and right after playing the second string, I lift my finger just slightly so that the note goes mute. And then, because I'm holding a bar to play C, I do a real little finger roll movement. So I lift my finger and then I just roll my fingertip slightly. Maybe it's going to be slightly easier to see, to get this movement, so that this way, just out of a single strum, I got my 3 notes that sound like a separate line, though it's just a sweeping strum, but with right care and right control over the sustain of the notes. So right now I can take the same idea, put my counting on top, and try to play these notes separately using this technique by lifting my fingers and rolling my index finger in this particular position. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now, on top of that, I'm going to add my ring finger on 10th fret, 4th string. So this way, I'm going to have C, E, G, and C. And it's like a major triad with no inversion and with added root on top. And I'm going to use the same technique by lifting my fingers, using a single strum, and I'm going to roll my fingers, my index finger onto first strings. Now, in slow tempos, I need to control this movement. It's downward, 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 downward. I'm making stops on consecutive strings. But when the tempo is faster, this becomes a single movement. It's hard to practice it slow, because at this point I need to hold the gravity of my hand. So it's like, again, let's use the drum analogy. Usually drummers use the weight of their relaxed hand and a stick to do a stroke, to do a downstroke. So what they use is just natural acceleration of earth gravity. I mean, that's what works there, right? So it's hard to slow down this movement. You need to hold it and resist it. It's kind of the same. Below certain tempo, it's just series of separate notes, but with economy picking. Above certain tempo, it's just one smooth movement, and right now my fretting hand needs to catch up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we can try to put them in consecutive runs, so it's with every bar single sweep. Now my picking hand doesn't do jumping or stops on every string. It's just like I would strum a chord slowly. If I add any notes, it's pretty much the same movement. So smooth movement of very relaxed hand. And what's interesting about this technique, that it only works when the picking hand is really relaxed. So it has this retroactive effect on picking in general. If I can memorize that I can do this thing with my relaxed hand and smooth movement, I can apply the same state that I just got my muscles in, and my mind, my musical mind, and play everything with this sort of relaxed grip and a relaxed hand. Okay, let's get back to our exercises, just to get to know different shapes and different inversions of major triad, and maybe make something slightly more interesting with them. But for now, let's focus just on major triad in different positions and kind of move them around. And at the same time, we'll get used to this very smooth and very relaxed movement. It's all pretty much in a grip. When this very relaxed and gentle grip is there, we're pretty much 80%. We got already 80% of the work done. It's just about clicking and get this perfect synchronization between fretting hand and picking hand. So we've been here for a while. So right now, I'm unsticking my fingers and do this little rolling movement. And because I started in this particular position, because it's fairly easy, because pretty much every single note is played by its distinct finger apart from the first two, but they're easy because they're on the edge of the neck, which makes it slightly easier to roll the finger. Now let's have a look at another position here, starting with third. So it's 14th fret on the D string, 12th on G string, 11th on B, and 12th on E string. So this is pretty much this shape. I need to hold my bar through first three strings, which is quite inconvenient because right now my index finger is not on the edge of the fretboard per se, so I'll have to do a much larger movement. I'm not entirely sure how it's gonna work because I've been playing this for some time in a certain way, and I'm not entirely sure how it's gonna look on the camera. I know what I'm doing with my hand, but I'm not sure if it's gonna be clear what will be visible on the screen, but the principle is pretty much the same. So what I'm doing in here, I'm unsticking my ring finger then onto another string, and I'm doing very tiny rolling motion with my index finger by lifting it slightly from G string and keeping it on my first string. So to summarize, it maybe not look like that, but I'm holding my fingers pretty much together and doing this little rotational movement of the whole wrist. So this position actually had a little challenge built in because of this little bar across 3 strings. Another position is going to be up here, and this is, I believe, 17th fret. I'll have to play I'm going to play those 3 notes just with my middle finger across 3 strings. So it's 17, 17, 17 on D, on G, and on B string, and index finger on 15th fret. And this one is actually easy because all I do is, again, little rotation with my middle finger. Okay, so now on top of that we can add some extra notes that will be fretted, that will make it slightly more interesting. We'll have more notes in one single run. So in this position I'm gonna add E here on 12th fret, and I'm gonna play it with a downstroke. So it's sweeping motion, and the last note, it's literally just like playing 2 notes, down, up. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes in just one movement, one smooth movement. Okay, in another position I'm gonna add G on 15th fret, so it's gonna be 14th, 12th, 13th, 12th with a wee bar across 3 strings, and 15th with my pinky. So it's gonna sound like this. And my fretting hand does very, very tiny little movements. That's what makes it so different from single line playing, because there isn't any active and big movement in fingers or in picking hand. It's very different series of movements to a single line playing. Okay. Okay, and the last one, I'm gonna add C on 20th fret. If you have 20 frets on your guitar, good for you. So 17th, 17th, 17th on 15th fret, first string, and pinky on 20th. So that's a lot of frets, but because it's high up the neck, there is not much of a stretch in here. Okay, so far we only covered downwards movement of a pick. So with the reverse situation, it's slightly trickier because I'm doing a sweep picking motion by holding my pick in a certain fashion. So the pick is kind of leaning in a direction that I play. And if I'm willing to do the upward movement, I need to rotate my wrist slightly so that the string are attacking rear back of the pick. So it's kind of slanted in the opposite direction. So for example, if I want to, right now my pick was against the strings, it was at a slight angle. It's not that intentional. It's not like I'm holding it and forcing it into this angle. It's a very natural position for downside. It's like a default position that I would play. But in the upward stroke, it's going to be slightly different because I want to drag the pick back into position. So if it were in the same position that it ended up, it just wouldn't work because I wouldn't be able to get this smooth movement. So say let's go back to the first position that we discussed here, at the 10th fret. Now let's do a little thing like this, that I'm gonna play all these notes with one movement, and once I'm down here, I'm rotating my hand and preparing for my return journey. So what's the best angle here? Like I'm reverting the angle right now. Now the trick is that to get back to my triad from this note that we added on 12th fret, I need to play a pull-off, because right now I'm out of a strike with my pick, because I'm already prepared for the upward movement back into sweeping arpeggio. So I'm doing my smooth downwards movement, and I'm picking pull off, and the principle is pretty much the same. I'm adding my fingers and removing my fingers as I play them. So if I'm doing the downwards line, when the notes go lower and lower and lower, so that's this one. What I'm doing here, after the note rang, I just lift my finger slightly. That's why there is not much to see. It's almost like with bass players. When they play some very complicated stuff, their fingers barely move. That's pretty much the same principle in here, that you can kind of see the shape of the chord, but not which note is actually fretted. That would be useful rhythm to practice this particular movement, because this is a series of 5 notes, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is just the beginning of the next bar, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we could do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And same story with another position here on the 12th fret, 12th, 14th. Okay, and next position on 17th fret. Okay, maybe last example for today would be to add another note in certain positions, but downwards, so that we can have a nice sequence, nice smooth line that we could use as an arpeggio, a major arpeggio, and then we could move it to different chords. So for example, this shape that we just played would work really fine if we just added E and C here. So what I got in here, we started on D string, but I can add those two notes and a little hammer on. Now the thing gets slightly complicated, because at this point my smooth movement downwards will need to take a break at some point, because of course it's still arpeggio movement, but because two notes are now played on a single string and the second note is played by hammering on. Oh. So my fretting hand needs to wait for these two first notes. So it's 15th fret on A string, hammer on, then three notes in a row on 17th fret, index finger on 15, then 20th fret, but my picking hand is already ready to play upward movement, pull off, series of swept three notes on second, third and fourth fret, another note on A string, and pull off. Actually, in slower tempos, I just played downstroke and upstroke. There was an alternate picking in there, mostly because in this slow tempo it's slightly easier to control to control the sustain by playing those two notes. So we're in slow tempos, we are not limited by any economic picking or anything. So it makes sense to just get better sound. But in general, as we move the tempo up, then hammer-ons and pull-offs will just work naturally. So okay, let's maybe move here onto 10th fret, and we're gonna play in G, exactly the same shape, but it's gonna be now we have series of 6 notes in total, so it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And maybe it's going to be slightly clear what I do with my picking hand. So, oh. So last two notes this time they were just picked to keep the flow of my picking hand in motion as I intended to. And just getting faster and faster, and then slower and slower, just to get this fluid movement going. Okay, now let's try to play F major, G major, and C major. So F major, same shape, but starts here on the 8th fret. Yeah. Then G, and then C. Now F major once, G major once, and C major twice. So it's going to be F, G, C, C, F, G, C, C. Now the trick is that the last note has to be moved to accommodate chord change, right? So and this last movement from G to C, it has to be quick, because in this tempo there is a slight jump to be done. So simple. All right. I'll possibly elaborate on the topic at some point, or maybe do a separate video about that. Anyway, if you have any questions, go ahead, get in touch, or comments, or however you like, and I'll be happy to make a proper dedicated response video with showing what's going on and what's there. Anyway, the idea of having those sweeping arpeggios is to get a good, relaxed picking hand technique and a good control over fretting hand that will serve in every other aspect of playing music, not necessarily playing the arpeggios. Because honestly, musically, they're quite limiting. I would say they get old very quickly. When overused, they just sound boring. But they're very good technical exercise, because they teach us how to control perfect synchronization between left and right hand. And also, it's a relaxed, very easygoing movement of picking hand that I think is very necessary, especially when we spend many, many hours practicing guitar. Okay, I guess that's it for today, and have a good night, and see you soon. Most probably this Tuesday on Telly Tuesday. I'm gonna show some twangy licks and some Telecaster stuff, so we'll see. Anyway, thanks everyone for joining. This is gonna be available. Oh, thank you, Bill. it's gonna be available as a playback, and possibly again I'm gonna edit out some first couple of minutes when nothing really happened. Anyway, thanks again for joining in. See you next time.